t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, your news' weekly talk show about European news. On Brussels, my love, we break down some of the stories of the week. Hear what's at stake for you and, of course, for the continent. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us for this special edition from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. Coming up this week, new figures from Brussels show the European economy is sluggish and inflation is here to stay for now. On that backdrop, the European Commission President delivered her fourth and final State of the Union speech on Wednesday. Modelled on the US President's annual centre stage moment, time is running out for Ursula von der Leyen to deliver on all she promised before European Parliament elections next June. We break down her performance. And after 2 years of talks, MEPs voted on a report this week urging EU member states to decriminalise prostitutes while criminalising buyers. The UN, the OECD and the European Women's Lobby cheer this move and say prostitution is a form of gender-based violence. But some sex workers' rights groups worry about the consequences of this Nordic model-based approach. We'll take a closer look. With our panel this week, Frances Fitzgerald, the Irish MEP from the European People's Party. Welcome. Pedro Marques, the Portuguese MEP from the Socialists. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Malin Bjork, Swedish member of the European Parliament from the Left. How are you all doing? How was your week here in Strasbourg?
Busy as ever, Maeve.
I can just imagine.
Intense, of course.
Very intensive.
Well, I'm very curious to hear what you made of the 1 hour State of the Union speech delivered back on Wednesday. But first, a little bit of context, perhaps, for our viewers.
It's that time of year again, the State of the European Union, the Commission President's annual speech that lays out what it intends to do for the coming year. It's fair to say that Ursula von der Leyen has had a lot of crises to deal with. From addressing Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic, the EU's huge green agenda, and of course the fallout from the war in Ukraine. This year is different though. With EU elections rapidly approaching in June 2024, the Commission President's term is nearly over. Demonstrating her achievements is a bigger priority than ever, and the main question over her future as European Commission President still remains.
Christopher Pitcher is reporting for us there. So what did you think of the speech? Frances Fitzgerald, we'll start with you. Did it keep your attention for the whole hour?
It did, actually, but I'm a fan. I think she's done a terrific job as president of the Commission. It was the big picture today. You know, it was about enlargement. It was about the huge challenges up ahead. She kind of put it, you know, we've got to react to the history that's there at the moment, like they did when the EU was founded, and deal with these big challenges. And I think the Parliament is well capable of taking them on, whether it's AI, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, enlargement, helping small businesses, dealing with the outstanding issues in gender equality. She touched on all of them and had quite a few initiatives that she announced in each of those. OK,
Frances Fitzgerald, very clearly a fan there of Ursula von der Leyen, of course, from the same political group. What about over at the left in your political group? Were you cheering her on or were you a little bit more sceptical?
I think we were a little bit more sceptical. And I think, she stayed in this kind of European EU bubble. And it's more about what she didn't say also. You know, she didn't address the fact that people are, you know, in working poverty. She didn't address the cost of living. And it feels like she has resigned in front of the threat to democracy and rule of law because she didn't say a word about that. And I think it's a little bit disconnected from reality then of people that are suffering, you know, attacks on their fundamental rights, women and LGBTI people, migrants, and also the issue of cost of living, where, you know, we need to see some action. And if you detach yourself from that and just speak on this EU bubble level, I think we're not on the right track. So it's more about what was not in there.
OK, what about yourself, Pedro Marques? Who was she speaking to in that speech? And do you agree with Malin Bjork there that she's detached from reality?
Maybe I would bridge, in a sense, these two statements, because I do think the speech was significant. Throughout all of the speech, there were significant positions on key aspects and proposals. and the mandate was significant. I mean, in a few years from now, we'll be remembering that in this mandate we got COVID, we got the war in Ukraine, and we got all the Green Deal through. So there was a lot going on, and the minimum salaries and the conditionality on the rule of law. So we delivered as Europe. But at the same time, I have to fully agree that there was a huge absence in this speech, which was people's lives, real daily lives. I mean, the cost of living is huge, even for families that are working. I mean, in the past, we were associating unemployment and poverty. At this moment, we have huge risk of poverty, even for employed families, particularly single-parent families, etc. So the risk of exclusion is there. It's cost of energy, it's the cost of the sheer basket.
I'm just going to stop you there. I'd like to give our viewers a taste of that speech, because I'm sure they weren't tuning in on Wednesday morning for that full hour, even though we had it live here on Euronews. Let's just take a listen now to the lady of the moment this week in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen.
We now have a European Green Deal as a centerpiece of our economy and unmatched in ambition. We have set the path for digital transition to become global pioneers in online rights.
There you go, the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. Now, I said earlier that that was her last State of the Union speech, because, of course, it was her last of this term.
Yes.
Because we have elections coming up next year, next June. The question on everyone's lips here is, though, will we see her back next year? What are you hearing here in the corridors of the Parliament?
Well, as you know, there's lots of rumours about whether she'll go to NATO, will she stay on here? I mean, I do believe that because of the way she's led the Commission, if, for example, it is an EPP president next time, I think she'll get a lot of support from heads of government, actually. So I think it's quite possible she will be back. But the truth is, nobody knows.
And does she want to go back? Because I actually asked her earlier this week. I had the opportunity to have a very brief interview with her, but she was very tight-lipped, and she just said to me the future of the EU will be good, but nothing about her.
Yeah, I guess you never
future.
know. I mean, look at the last time she sort of came out as a surprise candidate.
Indeed, you're laughing away there. What would you like to add?
No, I mean, we were, there when she came up. So this will go to the last moment,
Yes,
I would say. But let me maybe say that it's probably not about the person. I mean, of course, she did, let me be blunt, she did a good mandate. She delivered with her team, and I think that's very important. She delivered, as I said briefly.
By the way, in that speech that she delivered on 90% of the political guidelines.
I would argue that this Commission delivered, as I said, on the mutualization of debt to respond to the crisis, on the vaccines, now on the response to the war in Ukraine, on the minimum salaries, on the Green Deal. I mean, the Commission delivered.
But the Green Deal is not delivered.
No. Sorry?
No, Green Deal still has to be implemented.
On its way.
No,
I mean, you'd have to say that.
But we have approved the bulk of legislation, and now it is to be acted upon. But the point is that it was a team, and it were policies that we defined at the beginning of the mandate that have been delivered. So, of course, we are always looking for the person, but I mean, it's the policies, and that we managed
Malin,
to
I'd like to bring you in because you were disagreeing with the fact that when Francis Fitzgerald said that the Green Deal was well on his way, bearing in mind as well that Frans Timmermans has left the building, the commissioner who was in charge, of course, of that.
Yeah, and now she's picking in somebody that she takes directly from Shell company, fossil fuel company. So, you know, I think we have to deliver on social justice and the green transition. And today she spoke nothing of social justice, nothing on the issues of cost of living, as we briefly touched upon. She spoke about green transition, but only in the context of industry. But the green transition concerns people, and it has to be a just transition. She had no solutions, no proposals there. And in that sense, the EU is not delivering. And if we are going to make this green transition, it has to be just and it has to deliver for people, not some kind of luxury vision for a certain segment of the people or only concern industry. So I think here the Europe is failing. And I think, you know, will she continue? I would like to see a more left-leaning candidate, somebody that focuses on a just transition, a green and just, so a green and red transition, social justice, women's equality, LGBTI right, and also a fair and more
But let's be clear,
decent
Borg,
refugee policy.
the reality is that if you want to raise people's living standards to cope with inflation, one of the best ways of doing that is by Europe remaining competitive and creating more jobs. She is certainly putting the policies in place to create those jobs. And she also has been clearly responsible for reducing energy prices, even though it remains an ongoing issue. She did the deal on that. She's also a lot of initiatives in there about making it easier for small businesses to survive in Europe. Again, you do that, that's raising people's standards. We've also had just transition reports. I did one myself.
Can I jump in on this?
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. This is the point in which probably we have a disagreement, but also with Ursula von der Leyen. We in Europe, years ago, decades ago, we realized that globalization needed a European social model for globalization to also bring cohesion. When we created the internal market, we created cohesion policies and the European Social Fund. And this dimension, this social dimension of the European project, that's the part that was absent. Of course, we can create jobs, we should remain competitive, but we are near to full employment at this stage, and still there are millions suffering at this stage with the cost of living. And for those, there was no answer. That's the problem.
I'd like to bring in some more points of view, because, of course, this speech was delivered here in Strasbourg, but it was also watched very closely over in Brussels, which is, of course, the home of thousands of lobbyists, NGOs and think tanks. And with that in mind, I touched base with the European Policy Centre's Garvan Walsh and Georg Rikelis to hear their message to the Commission President. Take a listen.
This is no time for complacency, because the EU has done an amazing amount of stuff dealing with COVID, dealing with Russia's aggression against Ukraine, but these problems are incredibly serious. There could be a Trump victory in the United States next year. Then Europe might have to front up against the Russians on its own.
Europe is falling in the crack between the US and China with the Inflation Reduction Act and those kind of things. So there's a whole new agenda that the Commission has just embarked on, which is that of economic security. And what we see is that the US and China have the capacity for large-scale resource mobilization for these fundamental shifts we're going through, the green, the digital and the economic security transition. I think really this is Europe's predicament right now. One needs to muster these resources for strategic investments, or the European Union, Europe will wither.
Or the European Union will wither there. Georg Rikelis speaking to me a little bit earlier this week. I mean, what's your reaction to that? Was that speech perhaps too complacent? I mean, there was a lot of bragging in there.
Yes, I think it was too much of self-celebration and not much enough of forward-looking, except when it came to some more general geopolitical statements. So once again, you know, if we are building a Europe, we have to build a Europe of people, not of big enterprises or of industry. And I think this is a big challenge for all of us. We're going to elections next year. I'm not speaking to industry when we're speaking to voters that go, and they make the connection, of course, my jobs, you know, what creates jobs, etc. But, you know, the way that she embraces industry interest is just very far from how people live their realities.
If you want, I mean,
she was trying to convince EPP to keep on the Green Deal.
Of course, you have to embrace industry. I mean, we keep talking about keeping Europe competitive, making Europe, you know, stronger from a geopolitical point of view. Are you seriously saying that by, you know, having some sort of a voice against industry,
no, not
that
against
you're going
industry,
to damage?
But if you don't speak to people's lives as well,
she spoke about women's lives today. One of the key issues that we're all working on, violence against women.
This we work together,
and dealing with that. Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that you've underestimated her understanding of the needs of individual people. I think it's very strong.
She addressed the EPP because EPP group is not on board for the green transition anymore, so she needs to go and get you, and then she spoke about industry. But I say she needs to go and get people for the green transition also.
That's it. Was she speaking today to her EPP group, her European political...
I think she was speaking to a very wide audience today. All you have to do is listen and look through that speech. Europe is in quite a precarious position at the moment, even from an economic point of view. She highlighted everything we need to do to strengthen the geopolitical position of Europe and the jobs and economy. Economy is about people. If you don't strengthen the economy, you don't have the money for the social issues. I'm all in favour of doing more socially, by the way, and I thought her health initiative and Cancer for All was really important part of that social initiative.
And Heather Marcus, just switching gears, if you like, on the electric cars there as well, she had a strong message for China. Could we see Europe in a car war perhaps now with that?
Well, again, agreeing with Francis on this, I think the economic dimension of the speech was strong. What I like indeed is the social buffer. That was not there. But the economic front, the economic part of the speech was good. And also this geostrategic approach. In a sense, we are probably stopping being naive in terms of our economic position in the world and even in terms of the geopolitical situation. For decades, we built our project on this basis that if we would be closer as European countries, we would not fight anymore. And then we started doing the same around us. We started creating these economic links with Russia through gas and all. And we thought, okay, this would be enough for no more wars. But then finally, it's not the case. So we are stopping now this naiveness and we are facing reality, right? Yeah. We have clashes with other parts of the world. And at the same time, there was an important word, which is this idea of new partnerships with Africa, with Latin America, because we also have to talk to the ones that are like-minded with us.
And we heard her say this week,
we cannot be alone in this new era of regional powers.
And we heard her say, of course, this week that Africa should be treated in the same way that Ukraine was treated. But I wanted to come back to Francis Fitzgerald, what you said earlier about the SMEs.
Yes.
Because, of course, there's 23,000 SMEs. They're the so-called backbone of the economy here in the European Union. The majority are over in Italy. And we actually caught up with Ben Butters. He's the CEO of Eurochambre, who had also a message for Ursula von der Leyen this week. Take a listen.
Do better for businesses and do better for Europe, I guess, would be our message. And as a key part of that, they need to think small first. They need to think about smaller businesses in particular. Individually, they may not be relevant, but cumulatively, they're massively important to the economy. So we need an EU that is small business friendly. So businesses need help, they need support. And we are looking to the European Commission and the co-legislators to provide that support until the end of this mandate.
Ben Butters there from the Eurochambre. Now, we did hear as well Ursula von der Leyen saying that she would appoint an envoy who would work on these issues, making it simpler to do business. I mean, is that something that you would welcome that you heard from her? Or was it too little too late in your eyes?
Well, I think, also from the left side, especially my Swedish Left Party, we work a lot on green industry actually, and we work on small and medium-sized enterprises. But if facilitating the life of SMEs means like lowering standards for workers' rights, for the working environment, protection against hazardous substances, etc., then of course that's not the way forward. And it's more in general, we should be competing with, good standards for workers, good environmental standards. And we should put, that and make that standards in Europe so that we can also have influence globally. And that's the kind of model we have to work.
But also stay, of course, competitive, as we heard. We're running out of time, but I also want to hear your thoughts on EU enlargement. That was, of course, a big chunk of that speech we heard earlier. There was a very strong quote from Ursula von der Leyen, from the Commission President, saying the future of Ukraine is in our union, the future of the Western Balkans is in our union, and the future of Moldova is in our union. Just briefly, I'd like to hear from you all. What's your take on that? Is this a realistic promise? Is this something that you'd like to see happen? And can the EU as well afford this enlargement?
Yes, I of course, that's what I want to see. We have to bring our friends ever closer to us. And, she was very clear on that. And she also announced an examination of all of the, if you like, competing challenges there will be as we get bigger. And she made the point that every time there's been an enlargement, some people have said, this isn't going to work. And she said, and yet we've made it work. And I agree with that.
And that reforms would be needed as well.
We have to do the same now with this next enlargement.
Are your voters in favour of enlargement, do you think?
Our political family has been striving for the progress of the enlargement regarding the Western Balkans. And now we have this situation with Ukraine. I mean, they are literally paying with their blood the aspiration of the European dream. So, of course, we have to give them a European path. And this was correct, this idea that enlargement will be put forward. At the same time, she said clearly, we need to do our homework.
Yeah.
It will not be simple to host all these countries, but we have to reform ourselves to be able to host all those that really want to live the European dream.
And talk as well of carrying out rule of law reports in these member states as well. Briefly, your take on this?
I think enlargement is a good thing, but I think we also have to be very clear that we need to respect within the European Union, and including in those that want to become members, the rule of law and democracy and human rights, and that we have to have better foundation. I was very worried that Ursula didn't address this.
Going to have to stop you there, Malin Bjork. We're out of time, but thank you so much for your insights. Stay with us, though, because after this short break, we'll be hearing about a new report all about prostitution being called a form of gender-based violence, how it caught people's attention here in Strasbourg this week. Stay with us. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon. We're coming to you this week from Strasbourg, where MEPs gathered to vote on, among other things, a report to harmonise rules on prostitution throughout the European Union. As it stands, prostitution is legal in many EU countries like the Netherlands, Germany, Greece and Hungary, and was actually decriminalised in Belgium last year. But this report, that doesn't carry any legislative power, by the way, hopes to pave the way for change. To find out more about the contents of this, I asked European Women's Lobby, Alexia Fafara.
This initiative report is very important because it recognizes that prostitution is a form of violence and that we need to adopt the so-called equality model, which allows to create support programs and exit programs for survivors of prostitution. 90% of persons in prostitution are women and girls, so it's really a form of violence against women and girls. The best way to tackle this form of violence and to end demand, which is the cause, the main origin of the problem, we need to adopt this equality model, which means criminalizing sex buyers but decriminalizing persons in prostitution.
European Women's Lobby there. Pedro, I'd like to start with you on this because, of course, men need to be around the table. We didn't see a lot of men the other day in that press conference on that topic. How did you vote in that report on Thursday?
Well, I'm all in favour for this position. I think that indeed this is a blatant exploration of women. It's indeed, as it was referred, violence against women, and I like this model. I think we should try this model in a wider manner in Europe, because this idea that we should protect these women and create all the conditions for them to exit prostitution, and at the same time prosecute, go after the ones that demand, but particularly also after those that organize these forms of prostitution and profit from it and even traffic women. Let us remind that so many of these women, a huge percentage of these women, are migrant women. They are being explored, they are being brought to Europe to be explored sexually, and this is totally unacceptable. So I think this is a model, this is the way to go through.
80%, I believe, are migrant women, according to the reports I was looking at. What about you, Frances Fitzgerald, in your political group? How did people vote? Because I know it was a very divisive issue.
Yeah, well, there are different views, but, you know, it's a really strong report by Marie Neuchel, Christine Schneider, Malin, others have all been involved in it. And it does say we should move towards the Nordic model, which is criminalising the purchase of sexual services. I mean, I never cease to be surprised that so many countries legislate for prostitution. Because when you look at the facts, it is exploitation of women. It's one of the last forms of misogyny, as far as I'm concerned. It's sexual exploitation of the most vulnerable women. And really unacceptable in this day and age. And yet you get rationalisations around it. It's criminal activity. So many of the women are incredibly vulnerable. So this report is about helping women to exit prostitution, being aware of the huge amount of violence that they suffer. And so many of them, you know, are in these brothels, hidden away from view, you know, legal in certain countries, so hard for the police to intervene and save them or help them. So, I mean, that's the approach I would take, that, you know, we really have to move away from the legalisation of prostitution in different
Malin
countries.
Bjork, you have been working on this report. As I said earlier, it's 2 years in the making. How will this change the lives, do you think, for people involved in the industry?
Well, I think, you know, I'm from Sweden, and we were the first country in the world that, you know, put the responsibility where it belongs. That is with the buyers and the abusers and the pimps, and criminalizing them. And at the same time, as was said here, decriminalizing and depenalizing the people, and mostly that women and girls, in prostitution. And I think, so that is a big change. You know, you depenalize and you decriminalize those that are abused. But you do put the responsibility somewhere also. On the pimps, and on the buyers, or the Johns as they're called. And this changes the whole, it changes for the people, of course, in prostitution, because as Francis said, they will have a right to justice, they will have right to support for exit programs. And at the same time, we also say to young boys and men that this is not a way to treat women. In Germany, 8 of 10 men have abused and bought women in prostitution. In Sweden, the similar figure is 1 out of 10. And that's, that's...
Sorry, can you just repeat that statistic and tell me what's that based on?
Yeah, it's studies that have been done, interviews of certain, sample, it's called probably in English, which shows that, very many, 8 out of 10 men approximately in Germany have bought a woman in prostitution, and only 1 out of 10 in Sweden. And, what does that make of masculinity when you buy so-called consent? You cannot buy consent, so it affects all of us, how we think about sexuality, and not least how boys. I educate a boy. I want him to know that you cannot buy consent. And
well, you mentioned Germany.
Very free in your
sexuality. The debate has gained a lot of traction in Germany, with one Bavarian CDU politician calling her country the brothel of Europe and saying that Germany was famous for its sex tourism. So it's gaining traction, at least that report.
It's
over
becoming
in
one
Germany.
of the capitals of sex tourism.
Yeah, but this week as well, we did see Frances Fitzgerald in the European Parliament, a number of former prostitutes, now turned activists, and they were calling for this report to be given the momentum that they wanted to be given, like the activist and author Amelia Tiganos. She comes from Romania originally and was sold to a Spanish pimp for €300 and forced into prostitution at over 40 brothels in Spain. I spoke to her.
What is at stake is the suffering and destruction of many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of women's and girls' lives. And above all, what is at stake is the dignity of Europe, because I believe that we have to be a reflection of a model of progress and advances. And above all, I believe what is at stake is a model of equality. A model of equality and respect and good treatment between women and men, which is what we really aspire to.
Amelia Tiganos there speaking to me a little bit earlier. She was joined by yourself and all the other co-authors of that report. It's worth mentioning to our viewers and pointing out that not everyone supports this report. In fact, Amnesty International and a lot of groups, sex workers' rights groups, they're against this report.
You can take a few minority persons to say that it would be safer and more organized if we had recognize this, as a form of work. But the reality is the other way around. There will be more people, more women, enormous amount of women abused in prostitution. And when you turn pimps into just normal businessmen, you legitimize the whole, the whole process of abuse.
Okay.
So the violence increases, not decreases.
Okay. Fascinating discussion that we will return to very soon here on Brussels, My Love. Thank you so much to our guests for your analysis, for being with us here. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews and, of course, over on Euronews.com. Hello there, welcome back to Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly talk show. I'm Maeve McMahon. Now, remember this story that went viral a few weeks ago and dominated the coverage of the FIFA Women's World Cup? Louise Rubial is the president of the Spanish Football Federation, kissing player Jenni Hermosa on the lips. Well, this week, not only did Louise Rubial resign, his downfall and the consequences were debated right here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. So the end of a saga, perhaps, but the start of a serious conversation here on the European stage, perhaps. Your reaction to that debate the other day here in the Parliament?
Well, I watched the whole tournament. I love women's football. I used to play, but a long time ago. And when, the Spanish team beat Sweden and eliminated us, they were the best players, they were the best team, and up they go to take their medals. And comes a macho man to kind of diminish them. He acted in an exalting way towards Jennifer Hermoso, but also the other players were, groped and treated in a way that was completely, it was painful to watch. And I think this is the reaction by so many also, that so many women can recognize that. This is a Me Too of Spanish football, but it also touches on so many of us.
And what change will it bring about on European level? Like, why was this conversation had here in the European Parliament, Pedro?
Totally. I mean, this was totally regrettable. Unfortunately, there had been a very positive coverage of the Soccer World Cup, Women's Soccer World Cup. So there was a lot being done for equality with all the tournament, with all the buzz around it. And unfortunately, it spoiled the moment. It ruined that moment. But at the same time, I really hope that this coming to an end with the correct decision in the end, even if pushed by others. I really hope that some lessons come. Indeed, as you just said, this idea that this could be a Me Too in another area in which this was sheer violence in a sense as well, because it was not just a kiss by a random man to a random woman, which, by the way, you don't go around just kissing any random woman. You don't do that just by chance. But this man had power on that woman. That power was being used in a sense, and that's totally regrettable.
Let's hear your view.
Well, what I would say is, if this is what happens in public, what happens in private? I mean, the impunity, the arrogance, extraordinary, and even some of the reactions at the time trying to blame the woman. I mean, how classic, how typical. But I mean, the whole question of women in sports, I've worked on this for 30 years. I mean, the visibility of women in sport is just beginning to come through media and elsewhere. And there's fantastic changes. But, you know, women sports people still have to put up with an awful lot. Gaps in terms of decision making in the bodies, the international bodies, and so on. You know, we have a lot of work to do still, but this was a good debate here in this Parliament.
And his resignation giving hope, perhaps, to women across the continent. Now, we spoke earlier about the European Commission President's speech, and she didn't mention, of course, the infamous kiss in her speech or sexual harassment in sport, but she did have a lot to say about women's rights issues and gender violence, sounding almost like the gender equality minister that she once was back home. Take a listen.
I know this House supports our proposal on combating violence against women. And here too, I would like that we cast into law another basic principle. No means no. There can be no true equality without freedom from violence.
No means no there, the European Commission President making it very clear. Will this translate into anything, you think?
Well, I think she refers also specifically to the work that is now going on with Francis as one of the main negotiators on the new legislation against gender-based violence. So I really hope that that is coming through. And I think here she's much more in touch with reality and in touch with women. No means no.
The reality at the moment is that the member states are effectively, the vast majority of them, refusing to include rape in a directive on violence against women. We have to change that.
Well, like with everything, it's all in the hands, isn't it, of the EU member states over in the capitals. And I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much, Francis Fitzgerald, Pedro Marques and Martin Bjork for being with us here. And thank you, of course, for watching. Any comments for us on any of the stories that we've covered today or anything you'd like us to dive into, do reach out. Our email address is brusselsmylove@euronews.com. See you soon.